Hello, I'm Lizelle Sambry and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things writing, traditional publishing, and a little bit of reading. And today I thought it would be fun to give you a little bit of a future projects sneak peek. So at this point in this time and in my career, I'm really focusing on projects that I'm contracted for. So these are projects that I have already sold to a publisher, and I'm not doing a ton of other things, but that doesn't mean that I don't have ideas percolating in my mind at absolutely all times, because I do. I have a Notion page with over 60 book ideas that I add to all the time, and I'm always kind of thinking about what would I like to write next and what would I want to do here, and projects and things that are kind of just in the back of my mind. And so I thought it would be a fun video for me to talk about the kind of like big projects that are at the forefront of my mind, of like, if I had time, I would love to jump into these or kind of do this next. And so that's what these are. They are in very early stages, so I'm basically sharing kind of a bit of a loose concept of them, and kind of why I'm excited and the things I want to do for it. So nothing is really solid, but I just thought it would be kind of, fun to share these things with you. And who knows, maybe, however long down the pipeline, you'll see me actually writing and doing these projects. So let's go ahead and get started. Beginning with the adult projects, this first one, which I've codenamed hashtag The Glass House, which is what I was originally going to call it before I, of course, realized that Emily St. John Mandel has The Glass Hotel, and I was like, that's a very close title. And that's why I codenamed these things, because none of these things are final. But anyway, what is this book idea? So what I really wanted to do is do something that's kind of like reminiscent of 2001: A Space Odyssey, like just that idea of kind of like being isolated and that kind of like HAL AI sort of looking over you, but of course in like a modern lens, in which things are particularly advanced at this point, and AI has advanced to a certain level, and kind of playing with that in a house, in a situation in which people are invited to a house and then they all start dying one by one. So these are like kind of concepts that are like certainly have been done before, but I like the idea of kind of sandwiching them together and figuring out. And so originally the idea was that this house would be made entirely of glass. So that was why I was calling it The Glass House. I don't know if I'll actually stick with that when it comes to it, but I do like the idea of it. I think especially because it makes me think a little bit of that movie. It's called like Cube Squared, and it's a horror movie, and it's like these like glass cubes that like move around and stuff, and people get like stuck in each of the rooms. I also think that's really cool. The first movie in the series is Cube. I wouldn't recommend watching it. There's like a weird ableism vibe to it, but Cube Squared, very solid 2000s horror movie. So those are kind of the many vibes that I'm going together with. But yeah, in this case of, this kind of like very rich eccentric billionaire who's recently passed away, inviting his kind of friends to come and stay at this house for a weekend. And they decide to go, and then people start to die, and it's like, what is happening here? So this idea I'm very, very obsessed with. Like, if I sold my adult the couples retreat, if I sold that, this would definitely be like a second book that I would want to follow up with. It would be, I think, a little bit more edged on horror, but still like firmly in thriller because of that kind of closed what is it a closed circle mystery, locked door mystery of like everyone being trapped in one space and like the dying one by one, which I think would also be like a really good challenge for me, because I do always kind of hesitate to kill characters. Like, I get really sad about it, even though I do it, but I do get really sad about it. And so it would be a good challenge for me to really just go for it. And I'd want to make this like really fast paced, like breakneck speed, tons of bonkers twists, lots of like interpersonal drama. So that's really what I'm thinking about for it. And so I'm very excited about the idea of like being able to do that and like figuring out how I want this sort of like AI element to come into it and doing all of that. So that is the glass house. The next idea, which I've codenamed hashtag slugs, is a little bit out there. It's out there. It's one of those ideas where I'm like, people could absolutely hate this, but I personally love it. And so I must do this at some point. But it's definitely one of those things that's like a little bit riskier. I feel like this is the sort of project where I couldn't really just like pitch this or like sell this on proposal. I feel like I would have to write the full book because it's a little bit outlandish, and I just picture a lot of people just kind of being like, I don't know about this. Like, I feel like you would have to read the full project to really understand and get the grasp of it. But essentially what this is about, it's about a world in which slugs are kind of like trendy for a specific reason, which I won't get into, but they're kind of like a trendy, hot thing. People collect slugs. People want slugs that belong to celebrities. People pay a lot of money for slugs. So, you know, there's a whole system of breeding slugs. Sometimes people are only able to afford kind of cheap, small slugs, and that's really upsetting for them. And then, of course, some people sabotage other people's slugs by killing them with like salt and stuff. And so it's this whole world built upon this concept of slugs. It's, to me, it makes me think of like something like The Measure, which is a book where like everybody gets like this box suddenly, and it has like a string in it, and it tells you like how long you're going to live or not. I haven't actually read The Measure, but I know that that's the concept, and that's what kind of like like brought this together. It's like this concept of where you like change this one thing about the contemporary world and then imagine the entire world with this one thing changed. And so that's kind of what I thought would be cool about this idea. And essentially, like, the narrative is following, you know, this kind of woman whose job it is to like go and sabotage slugs and like kill them. And like one day she like goes to do it, and there's like a dead body there, and it's like, what's happening? So this is like have I really worked out what the actual thriller mystery is going to be? No, not at all. I've really stuck very hard on the whole slug thing. And that's kind of where most of this idea has come from. And I know this sounds so bonkers as I pitch it. This is why I said this is the sort of thing where I'd really probably have to write the full book, because it's just wild. It's wild to pitch this. I don't think this is an idea where people are like, ooh, like, I think people are kind of like, ah. But anyway, I'm incredibly excited about it, and I don't know if I want to go like a sort of like buddy cop route, like, well, not buddy cop, like, what's the word? Private detective sort of thing. Like, I don't know if I want to go that route, or like a seedy underbelly of slug trading. Like, I don't really know what I want to do with it. I just know that there will be a murder involved, and that there will be at least one POV of this woman whose job it is to like go around and like sabotage slugs, and that's it. That's all I've got. But I'm obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with the idea of it. I just think it's so weird that I would have to write it. I have to write it because it's so strange. And I don't know if I could pull it off, but I think it would be really challenging in an interesting way to try and pull something like that off. And the final adult idea that's kind of top of mind for me is what I'm calling loosely Trinidad book. So how this came about is there is actually a writing retreat. I believe it's called Island Scribe Retreats, and they do retreats in like the Caribbean. And I've seen some people I like know in the writing community go to these retreats. I think this year they went to Dominica, and the year before they actually did go to Trinidad and Tobago, which is where, you know, my family is from, my cultural background, that sort of thing. And I was like, oh, that would be really cool to do a writing retreat there. And so I've been kind of like hoping that in the future they'll do a writing retreat and they'll do Trinidad and Tobago again. And in that case, I'd really love to join up and go there and like go for the retreat and then stay for a little bit longer. And so I thought about like what sort of book I might work on if I was going to do that. And this is kind of the idea that I came up with. So I haven't been to Trinidad and Tobago since I was a child. I won't get into it, but long story short, when I was a child, something very traumatic happened to me. And so I did not go back. For like, yeah, a variety of reasons, I did not go back. But in recent years, I have been thinking about like wanting to go back and wanting to kind of, you know, root through all of that in a sort of literary form and trying to put that together somehow. And so when I saw the retreats, I was like, that would be like a really great way in. So I don't know if they have anything planned to go to Trinidad and Tobago again. If they did, I would 100% sign up. I would be there. And so this is the book that I would want to work on. And so it's, I mean, it's not really autobiographical, but like there are a lot of similarities, so that I would have this main character who again hasn't been to Trinidad since she was a child because something traumatic happened to her. And she is coming now because this sort of, I love an eccentric billionaire, this sort of eccentric billionaire has created this sort of like interesting AI machine that kind of like brings people's imaginations to life is the general idea I have. But he doesn't want to use AI art. He wants like art created from an artist. And so this woman is an illustrator, and so he hires her to come and basically like produce a bunch of drawings that can be used and kind of manipulated by this AI system, so that it's kind of like he's paid a real artist and he's, you know, supporting someone who has a Trinidadian background, that sort of thing. So that's kind of the setup of it. And so she arrives to do all this drawings and like stay in his like little weird billionaire compound, and also to kind of like address like some of the trauma and like reconnect to being there and being on the islands. And during that process, something kind of strange starts happening with his machine. And that's it. That's like the whole setup. But I do know it's definitely going to be like a horror edged thriller. That's definitely the vibe that I'm going with. I think I haven't quite worked out the whole machine thing, and that might very well just change. Like I might at some point just drop the whole machine thing and she's just an illustrator and she goes there. I don't really know. That's the most like vague part of it, because I was trying to figure out how to create the horror element. You know, how to create like an additional kind of like horror speculative thing. And because when I do like my adult works, what I'm really wanting to do is like horror thrillers with like sci-fi speculative leans, or like a little sci-fi speculative aspect. And so I think I was trying to figure out what that might be, and that's where this whole machine thing came out. But I'm sure that will probably change over time, because I truly have no idea about this machine thing. I just know that I want her to be an illustrator, because I think that would be really cool to have like a sort of like artist type character. I'm really interested in like art and illustration. I have dabbled myself. I don't think I'm very good, but I've dabbled. I've always wanted to get better, but I am bad at committing to things, but I just think it would be like an interesting character and concept. And so this is like very specific circumstances, like I would have to be going on this retreat, but I wanted to kind of like have something in the back of my mind as an idea, if that retreat ever came up like that, so that I could kind of put together a grant application and like have a solid idea and kind of go forward from there. Though of course this is not a solid idea, I would have to make it much more solid, but that's kind of the gist of it. And now we get into the YA ideas. So the first one, called hashtag Ringu Revamp, I have always wanted to do like a YA The Ring something, like the Ring movie. I love that idea, and maybe it's like just the time period I grew up in, and like that was such a big horror movie of like the 7 days, and there was so much like memeing and like stuff around it, but it was just like, it was such a moment, and I just love that idea of this like haunted sort of movie. And I feel like a lot of authors are really like intrigued by this idea, because I feel like we've seen so many books come out recently that are all about like these like haunted movie sets. I'm thinking like Silver Nitrate by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, horror movie by Paul Tremblay, which I read recently and I absolutely loved. I really loved that book. I put it down as like a fave of the year. I loved it. So that one, and then I think Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose, and I feel like there's just been like so many of those things. So I feel like that like haunted movie, like I think those have really been more like haunted sort of movie sets type things, but I just feel like that idea is really captivating, and I feel like those different books coming out shows that like authors are really captivated by that idea, and I just really like it, and I would love to do it through like a YA sort of lens. I don't know why, but it feels like it would work so much better in YA, especially when I think of things like a haunted kind of like VHS tape. Like teens today are not using VHS tapes, and I think there's like an interesting idea around like interacting with media that is like not of your time and like getting to know it that way. And I feel like there's something that's like even more kind of like leaning into like a horror edge or like a strange edge when you're really not familiar with that sort of media type. And I think that's why I like it as YA, because there's something sort of like strange about interacting with something like from the past like that. So I think that's really cool about it. And I'd also love to do it as like an It Follows type thing. Like, so It Follows is a horror movie. This is really a lot of me talking about my favorite media that I like and how they've inspired me. But anyway, It Follows is a horror movie, and it's basically about this thing that follows you and like ultimately tries to kill you, and the only way to kind of get it to stop following you is to do something specific. I guess I won't get into it because I guess it is technically a movie spoiler, and you know, get it to follow someone else essentially is what this is, and I just loved that concept. The movie itself, back and forth, but I loved that concept of like the passing on of a curse. There's also another movie, is it called Truth or Dare? I can't remember. It's got the woman from Pretty Little Liars, the one that was in the creepy relationship with the teacher. Can't even really call it a relationship. Anyway, so she was in it. I can't remember what it's called. It must be Truth or Dare because I feel like they were playing Truth or Dare. Anyway, and that has like a similar sort of mechanic. I just like that. I like the idea of like passing on things. And so those are my very loose ideas that I want to go into this sort of like haunted videotape thing. But yeah, the only idea I have is like the teens discover it, they watch it, some stuff happens, they gotta figure out how to get out of it. And to me, it's like, this would be such a like, just like a popcorn horror. Like, I know that I love to do my deep, intense themes in my YA books. I know I love to do that stuff, but I feel like this would be just such a like pure popcorn horror, just like teen drama sort of thing. Like, I'm really not gonna do any giant theme, though I say that and I probably would because I can never help myself. But I just love like all of those concepts coming together. The next one is hashtag dystopian, because this is some of the vagueness of what I have in store for this book. But I want to do a dystopian something so badly. I feel like I have to get into it. I feel like these are the stories that I was raised on. And I just have to do something. And so I do have kind of an idea, and I want to do something about like the aftermath of dystopian. So I don't want to get into the actual like dystopian, like the beginning of it or the depth of it. I want to do like an aftermath sort of thing, like how has humanity kind of rearranged itself. And part of me is interested in like dabbling a little bit in like some hope punk, but I also feel like I'm not the person for hope punk because I always want to like throw in murder. So I could never actually do that. But I just want to be able to explore a kind of like aftermath situation, and also kind of the sort of pervasive paranoia of that sort of thing happening again. Because I just feel like if you go through a whole dystopian thing, you go through a whole thing and you make it out the other side and you're in the aftermath, I just feel like you are always going to be afraid that it's going to happen again. I just feel like that's a natural kind of trauma response to that whole thing. And so that's what I'm getting at. I want like an after everything, like after Katniss and Peeta have their baby and all that. I want the after of that whole thing, and I really want to play on that sort of like paranoid feeling of like, is this going to happen again, and like how that affects people. And I just came up with it as a YA concept. I just kind of feel also like people would be really young, just because of like all the people that would die out in the dystopia. And then you're like, okay, now we're rebuilding. And I just feel like people would have a lot of kids. And so there would just be a lot of young people around. And like, that would be interesting too, of like growing up in the aftermath of a dystopia, and like what does that look like, and like how is your life, and like how do you interact with like adults and elders who actively experience that when you didn't. And I just think that's I don't know if there's something like so like delicious about that to me. Like I really like it. And of course it would be like a dystopian horror, because clearly I'm in something of a horror era. And so a lot of my ideas are horror ideas. And so it would just be that sort of edge to it. And yeah, I'm just like really excited about that sort of idea of like a sort of paranoia building. And then I also almost feel like when you haven't been through that, like, is that paranoia like a little bit of a game to you, or are you a little bit excited about that possibility? I also think those are like interesting things to explore. So that is my very vague dystopian idea. And the last YA idea is hashtag epistolary. I just want to do an epistolary YA novel. I want to do something that makes me think of, and again, here you're going to get the references. So I really love horror movies where it's like the computer screen and all you see is the computer screen and the person using the computer. Half the time it's very unnatural because people are like staring at themselves in the FaceTime screen and like doing other stuff, and you wouldn't I can't think of a scenario in which you would open up FaceTime and just like stare at yourself and like use the computer while staring at yourself in FaceTime. It's very weird behavior. But anyway, I accept it in these movies. I'm thinking about things like Searching, Missing. I watched one on Netflix called Resurrection. I believe it was called. That one was really good. And when I say really good, I mean horror movie really good. In that it's like a little bit bad, but it's very satisfying to watch. And then also Host, which is one I absolutely love. That one was like entirely through Zoom, and like set during, you know, like the height of the pandemic. And it was just like when it came out at the time, it was still that. And so just like, oh, it was so good. It was so good. Also like Unfriended, Dark Web. Anyway, I could go on and on about these movies. I absolutely love them. And I want to do something like that in a book. And again, these things exist in books. So there are books that are like entirely interviews or, you know, mix of like, I'm thinking again of Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay, which is like some memoir excerpts, some scripts, some interviews, that sort of thing. And I really want to do a YA. I just want it to be like 100% social media, 100%. I just think that would be so cool. I think it would be such a cool idea to do like a thriller horror, just with like epistolary style, but like all social media stuff. I just think that would be super fun to do, and like such a like a challenge writing wise, to cut out any sort of narrative and to just like pull yourself into that, especially in something like social media where people are so often like not necessarily being themselves or being like a different version of themselves. Some people like outright lying and like catfishing and pretending to be different people. And just like, I just think that's so juicy. That would be so fun as like a horror thriller. Again, like another like very popcorny, but I probably wouldn't get to make it popcorny because I probably have to make some sort of grand theme about social media. Because that's the way that I am. But I absolutely love the idea of this. I have no idea what the actual concept, what the actual like, you know, premise of this would be. I just think it would be really cool to do it. Yeah, I just think it's so interesting. And again, like, it's not like epistolary novels are anything new or like different. I feel like this is very classic, but I just feel like this would be so good. And for that challenge, exactly like I said, like that real difficulty of like figuring out how to get a full characterization when all you can do is like through people's like social media. And I'm just thinking of like the side group chats, like, oh, it would be so juicy. It would be so juicy. So I would love to do that. Again, I have no idea how I would put these things together or how that would go. But I would want to make the attempt and try it. I feel like for this one in particular, I would need so much time. I would need so much extra time just to figure out how to put something like that together. But I just think it would be so fun. Like, that's the sort of thing that I would love to read. And so of course I would love to write it. And now into the middle grade ideas, and I only have one middle grade idea, which is really, I guess, sort of like more of a middle grade, lower YA sort of idea, but I consider it to be separate and in that sort of middle grade vein. And it is actually a graphic novel idea. So I would love for this to be a graphic novel. I cannot draw, so I would have to find an illustrator. But you know, I'd like to write the script and like get to see that come together. I would really love to be involved in a graphic novel project. So this is my graphic novel idea. And it's called #Murder Girls. So it's about a group of girls, and basically they investigate what's been deemed like sort of true crime things, but they think has some sort of supernatural origin. And so they want to uncover the supernatural origin of it. And this is what they do in their little group of friends, and that they've done for a long time. They've known each other for a very long time. And then we come to this transition period, in which they're going from middle school to high school. And not all the girls are going to the same school. Some girls are going to the same school, but they're getting involved in different sort of like groups or activities and like making new friends. And the main character really feels like the group is splintering, and so she wants to find this big case for them to solve together to kind of like bring them all back into the fold, and feel like she's holding on to and maintaining her friend group as it kind of tries to splinter on her. And so that's the idea. Originally I was gonna like set them in like this like fantasy town that was like separated from the rest of the world. But then later I decided I didn't like that very much. So I was just gonna leave it as is and do it as sort of like a horror edge sort of thing, like very kind of like Paper Girls coded, if you're familiar with that graphic novel slash TV adaptation, something in that vein. And I did want it to feel a little bit not so sanitized. Like, I'm aware that like 13-year-olds swear and like know some things about sex, even if the ideas are sometimes like very weird and convoluted. And I wanted to really get into that sort of experience and like get to explore all of that and kind of feel like I'm getting like a full breath of that sort of time period, because I'm really like interested in those sorts of transition times. I think those are really interesting, especially like when you're like a young person. Like, I remember like when I was 13, I decided to go to a high school like in the city, and I was living in like a suburb of Toronto, and so like this school was more like in downtown Toronto, and like I was doing all this stuff and I was taking the subway, and I really struggled with that transition. I struggled to make friends. I struggled to adjust. I like it was like a difficult transition period, and I feel like that's the sort of thing that I would love to get into with this sort of graphic novel. And so it feels to me more suited to that middle grade sort of lower YA section, but I feel like it would probably maybe slot a bit better into middle grade. Yeah, but I guess we'll see, because I guess Paper Girls is it technically shelved as adult? It might be. Anyway, I'm not gonna think too hard about it now, since again, this is really just like a beginning idea phase, but that's kind of really what I'm interested in getting into, that sort of transition, those sorts of like firsts involved in that sort of time period, and that kind of like friendship focus, like a really hard friendship focus, and like how you deal with feeling like your friends and you are like drifting apart or changing or becoming new people, and how you kind of adjust to that. And that's it for the future writing project sneak peek. I hope this was fun for you to watch and kind of like hear about these different ideas. Like, I'm really excited about all of these. I think right now I have more of a bit of a focus on the adult projects, because it's the sort of thing where it's like, if my book sold, then maybe I could do these projects, and it's a little bit more immediate, as opposed to YA. Like, I'm really focused on A Mastery of Monsters right now, and I'm like so locked into that, and that's 3 books and the first one hasn't even come out, so it's just like thinking about YA ideas is a little bit further flung, because I'm not going to get to do it for a while. But I do know that when I like, you know, go back to YA, I would love to do more like horror thrillers again. I like that idea of like swapping off between like fantasy stuff and then like horror thriller stuff and flip-flopping back that way. And so I think that's also why the YA ideas are more like horror thriller based, because that's kind of where I see myself going after that fact. But yeah, I'm just really excited about all of them. I am constantly adding more and more ideas. I just think it's so fun to think of things to write in the future, and like, even if I never get to those things, or if I end up deciding to, you know, return to something else. I made a video not too long ago about revisiting my failures, in which I kind of talked about books I'd shelved and whether or not I would want to go back to those someday. And so those ideas are also very much in the mix, because I might want to go back to one of those one day. But I get so excited about all the different ideas and all the possibilities, and it's nice to just kind of like have those all churning in my head, because who knows what I'll get to write, and hopefully I have lots and lots of years to keep writing and to get all my ideas down. But if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, and thanks so much for watching. Bye!